We're on part 2 of the midterm study guide. So number 10 is about defining salutary neglect, and did the colonies like it? Explain. Salutary neglect is when Britain pretty much leaves the colonies alone. They use the colonies for money. It's the source of revenue for them. The colonies' job is to provide raw materials like rice, tobacco, indigo for the mother country, Britain. And as long as the colonies are sending that stuff over and it's coming in at a steady supply, Britain doesn't do too much to the colonies. They are really what we kind of call a neglectful parent or a deadbeat parent. Britain is the mother country. Their job is to be a mother, nurture, take care of, protect, be mama bear. But they're not that way with the colonies. And do the colonies like it? Yep. I mean, think about the people who are coming over here. They're coming over here for the real reasons, right? Religion, economics, adventure, land. So when you look at these people who are coming over here and Britain's pretty much leaving them alone, they're allowed to develop how they want. So they pretty much create their own governments. We see that constantly. Now they do model the British government, but they create their own. They create their own rules. They create their own everything because Britain's not doing anything like that for them. They just want the money. So when Britain tries to enforce things that they've never done before, that's where the problem is going to come in, and that's where revolutionary thought is going to start taking place. So pretty much the colonies like salutary neglect. They're allowed to rule themselves. They don't follow most laws. They kind of pick and choose like it's a menu of options. And when Britain is going to have the French and Indian War, they're suddenly going to enforce this stuff. And now you have 100 years of colonies not following laws. And it's going to be really hard to suddenly force them. Okay. So number 11 is how are mercantilism and the Navigation Acts connected? And then you had to review the requirements of the Navigation Acts. Mercantilism is just an economic policy that a mother country, Britain, exports more than they import. So Britain sells more to the colonies than they will ever buy. And this is in dollar amounts as well. So like Britain is always going to make money. Mercantilism allows a favorable balance of trade for the mother country. It favors them. So, you guys, think about it as, Hunger Games. The odds are never in the district's favor. It's always in the favor of the capital. It's the same thing with mercantilism. The capital this time is Britain, and the districts are the colonies. You're never going to win. Britain, the mother country, will always win. The Navigation Acts is just a law that stated that all your goods had to actually go through British ships and go through British ports. And this is because of smuggling in the colonies. The colonists are really, really good at smuggling goods, and they lie, oh, I don't have 100 pounds of that. I only got, 50 pounds. You don't know how to measure things. And this is why they did it. They did it because the colonies aren't paying up on all the taxes. So the Navigation Act is to ensure all the taxes. So both ensure that Britain would make the money, or all the profits from the colonies, and that the colonies would not. And again, when Britain starts to really try and enforce this, it's a little too late. The colonies have their own boats built, they got false bottoms, they've got smuggling holes in it, and they haven't really been following the policy ever of going in the British ports. So they've been going in and selling their goods to whoever will pay the highest price for it, like France and Spain. So number 12 is about the Enlightenment, and here's just 3. There's tons of Enlightenment philosophers, but these are the 3 that I'm having you look at. So Montesquieu, remember he believed the 3 branches of government would serve as a checks and balance system to the government's power. And remember, Montesquieu, 3 syllables, 3 branches. And so how we see this in our government is we do have a legislative, executive, and judicial branch. The legislative makes the laws, the executive enforces, and the judicial branch judges and interprets those laws to determine whether they're constitutional or not. So we actually follow Montesquieu when we create the U.S. Constitution. John Locke believed that the government's role was to protect individuals' rights to life, liberty, and property. He called these your natural rights, and this is kind of where he alludes to a contract, a social contract, and Rousseau will finish up. But he pretty much says this is what the government is obligated to do. They have to protect your right to life, liberty, and property. Now, how he affects us is Thomas Jefferson, another one of our philosophers, our Enlightenment thinkers. He's going to use this theory when he writes the Declaration of Independence, and we announce that to the world July 4, 1776. It finally gets adopted. But he changes it from natural rights to inalienable rights, and he says that we all have the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now, Rousseau's the next guy we're going to look at. Rousseau believed that the government and the people had signed a social contract, and it's not like, it's like a real contract, but it's a contract. You hold your end of the bargain, I hold my end of the bargain. But it ensures that the government would protect our individual freedoms in exchange for the consent of the governed. So, what the social contract is, and this consent of the governed, is the U.S. Constitution. That's our contract. And you and I consent by voting. So, it's used throughout the U.S. Constitution and the Declaration of Independence. And it's talking about voting and having representation. And again, Jefferson is going to use Rousseau in the Declaration of Independence because he's talking about how you're taxing us without the consent of the people. Because remember, the colonies never have someone in Parliament. They never have an American colonist there. Okay. The next question is question 13, and it asks you the significance of the Magna Carta. And so when you look at the significance of the Magna Carta, this is done in 1215, it pretty much limits the king's power over the nobles, and it introduces this concept, and it's a novel concept at the time, of a limited government. So even though, like, the colonies are going to complain that Britain is a tyrant, that they're a dictator, they actually have a very limited government. It's really Parliament that they have the most issue with. It's just that the king is the symbolic head of the government. So as time goes on and we actually create our U.S. Constitution, this is one of our principles. One of our principles is limited government. And it says the U.S. anyone in the U.S. cannot do anything they want. Basically, in the United States Constitution, everybody has to follow this thing called the rule of law. So it limits what the government can and cannot do. So like Nixon over there tried to use this thing where he said he, as the president, didn't have to turn over evidence to the United States Supreme Court, and they were investigating him for Watergate. Well, long story short, he does, because just because you're the president doesn't give you a pass, and, then he turned it in, and then, he had to leave, okay? So, no one is above the law, not even the President of the United States. That's a limited government. The government can only do what is in the Constitution. Next question, 14. Identify Toleration Act of 1649. This was created by Lord Baltimore, and basically what it does is it allows Catholics to come to Mary's land. Queen Mary was the last Catholic queen of England, and so Maryland becomes the colony that the Catholics can come to. But now you can come as well if you're a Protestant. So he actually allows all Christians to settle freely and worship freely in this colony of Maryland. Number 15 is what was the First Great Awakening and the effects on the colonies in the Revolution. So the First Great Awakening is just a Christian revival that's going to happen here in the colonies. And it's going to be a time when you're going to start having a lot of new Protestant faiths developing. And as the First Great Awakening is spreading, in a lot of ways they kind of try and mimic Jesus Christ and his preachings at sermons and how he does it to the regular people. So when you look at the First Great Awakening, they don't really preach in these big fancy churches. They kind of go to the barns, they go to the hills, and they just preach, and they attract thousands and thousands of people. The concept that's going to be really populated by the First Great Awakening is that anyone who believed would be saved. So it's allowing salvation to all who believed and reduced the power of the clergy. So your church leaders are no longer the most powerful people. Think about the Puritans and think about the Salem witch trials. It's the government and the church leaders, they're one and the same. It's a theocracy in the Puritans' colony. And they are going after people who they believe are witches, and they don't believe that, they just kill you. They burn you, press you with rocks, they hang you. But the First Great Awakening says, if you want to be saved, believe. And you can read the Bible and you can interpret it the way you want. So it affected the colonies because they start to question authority. If you can question religion, you can question just about anything else. They don't die because they're questioning the Bible and they're questioning how the Bible is being read to them by the clergy. That's really what they're questioning, is how the church leaders are interpreting this Bible. And basically the leaders of the First Great Awakening are saying, you're smart enough, you can read it, and you can understand the Bible. So they're questioning authority. So if you can question your church leadership, questioning the government is no big deal. Look at what happens when you question the church leadership too much back there in Salem. So you have the authority of the British government being questioned. And as time goes on, you do see this as a contributing factor to the American Revolution. This is also one of the factors of why the First Amendment says freedom of religion. By the time the American Revolution is over, there are hundreds, thousands of religions here in the colonies. So, number 16, how did the French and Indian War contribute to the Revolutionary War? So, during the war, the colonists resented that Britain wanted them to pay taxes for the soldiers being sent and used to defend the colonies against the French and the Indians. When you think about Britain, they're the mother country. They're supposed to be protecting the colonies. They're at war with France, and so, of course, the war spills over here. And so they send soldiers over here. They're training the colonists. The colonists are fighting along with the British soldiers. And when the war is all done, there is a huge debt that has to be paid. And they feel that the colonies should help pay, because part of that debt was helping protect the colonies from the French and Indian attacks. The colonies don't like it. They don't like the taxes. They don't feel that this is fair or just, that they should have to pay for the defense of the colonies. They feel Britain should do this. And then it just kind of leads to huge animosity between the colonies and Britain. And so after all this is done, Britain is kind of the number one power in the world, but they're in huge debt. So whenever a country's in debt, they start taxing. And so they started to enforce taxation that they had not done previously. And that's really what's going to kind of rally the colonies a lot. And it's going to rally them around that comment, no taxation without representation. So question 17 is, give one example of a direct democracy and one example of an indirect democracy. A direct democracy is simply where everyone votes on each law. Now back then it's going to be white male landowners, and at certain parts it'll be churchmen who own land. But a direct democracy would be you voting. Direct democracy is like popular vote. Okay. Now, in New England, there are going to be town hall meetings and the Mayflower Compact. So the men of the colonies will gather together and they'll vote on little issues. So a lot of times you have direct democracies done on little issues in towns with town hall meetings or with city councils. It'll be that way. So you'll just have the people vote directly on the issues. You also have indirect democracy. So indirect democracy is where people vote on representatives who then vote on the laws. When you have a representative democracy, you have an indirect democracy. This is allowing people to be experts on government and government issues. So when you look at colonial examples, you look at the House of Burgesses in Virginia, and you look at the Connecticut Fundamental Orders. Today, your United States government, the federal government, is an indirect democracy. We have a House of Representatives and we have a Senate who actually votes on all our laws for us. They are paid to be educated on the laws, and they are paid to be experts so that they will vote on laws that are best for you and me. And again, kind of that old democracy thinking back there with Mayflower and the New England town hall meetings, that you're supposed to vote for the good of everyone.